The pre-dawn silence of the Tunisian desert shattered like glass. As the first American artillery shells screamed overhead, their orange flames cutting through the darkness like vengeful spirits, Lieutenant Colonel George Smith, Jr. pressed his binoculars against his weathered face, watching the distant German positions erupting in fountains of sand and fire. It was March 23, 1943, and the 2nd United States Corps was about to announce its deadly intentions to the Africa Corps. "They won't be expecting this," muttered Captain James Rodriguez, crouched beside Smith in their hastily dug observation post. The thunder of American guns rolled across the barren landscape like an approaching storm, each salvo marking the beginning of what would become known as the Battle of El Guettar. After the humiliating defeat at Kasserine Pass just weeks earlier, the Americans had something to prove to both their allies and their enemies. General George Smith Patton, Jr. had arrived in North Africa with fire in his eyes and steel in his voice. The man they called Old Blood and Guts had spent the previous month transforming the demoralized Second Corps into a fighting machine, worthy of facing Erwin Rommel's legendary Africa Corps, his pearl-handled revolvers gleaming at his sides. Patton had driven his men through relentless training in the scorching desert heat, his profanity-laced speeches echoing across training grounds. As he rebuilt American confidence one curse word at a time, the strategic importance of El Guettar could not be overstated. This dusty crossroads town in central Tunisia controlled the vital supply routes that fed the German and Italian forces in North Africa. According to contemporary military analyses from Stars and Stripes newspaper, capturing El Guettar would effectively cut the Axis supply lines and force Rommel into a desperate defensive posture. For the Americans, it represented redemption after Kasserine Pass had exposed their tactical inexperience to the world. As dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of amber and gold, the full scope of Patton's offensive began to unfold. The 1st Armored Division, reorganized and re-equipped after their mauling at Kasserine, rolled forward in precisely coordinated formations. Sherman tanks emerged from behind rocky ridges like mechanical predators, their tracks churning the desert sand into bellowing clouds. The 9th Infantry Division advanced alongside them, their fixed bayonets glinting in the morning light as they prepared to face the Africa Corps. In direct combat, the German defenders, commanded by Colonel Rudolf Lang of the 21st Panzer Division, had not been idle. Rommel himself had overseen the construction of formidable defensive positions around El Guettar, complete with hidden anti-tank guns, minefields, and carefully positioned machine gun nests. The Desert Fox understood that losing El Guettar would doom his entire North African campaign, making this battle a crucial test of wills. Between two of World War II's most aggressive commanders, Smith lowered his binoculars as American fighter planes roared overhead, their engines adding to the symphony of war that was building across the desert battlefield. The pilots of the 33rd Fighter Group had been given clear orders, establish air superiority, and provide close support for the advancing ground forces. Their P-40 Warhawks ducked toward German positions like hawks striking prey, their machine guns chattering death from above. The stage was set for one of the most significant American victories in the North African campaign, a battle that would restore confidence in American fighting ability and prove that the United States Army could stand toe-to-toe with Germany's finest divisions. The morning of March 23rd unfolded like a deadly chess match played with tanks and artillery pieces across the sun-baked terrain surrounding El Guettar. Colonel Rudolf Lang peered through his field glasses from his command post on Hill 609, watching the American formations advance with the methodical precision that had been lacking at Kasserine Pass. These were not the same confused and demoralized troops his Africa Corps had scattered just 6 weeks earlier. Patton's tactical revolution was evident in every movement of the attacking forces. The 1st Armored Division advanced in coordinated waves, with Sherman tanks providing covering fire while infantry squads leapfrogged forward from one defensive position to the next. Gone was the reckless abandon that had characterized earlier American attacks. In its place was a calculated aggression that spoke of hard-learned lessons and intensive retraining. Lieutenant Robert Henderson of the 13th Armored Regiment felt the familiar vibration of his Sherman tank's engine as they crested a low ridge, overlooking the German defensive lines. Through his periscope, he could see the telltale muzzle flashes of hidden anti-tank guns and the distinctive silhouettes of German panzers hull down behind defensive earthworks. The enemy had chosen their ground well, turning the natural terrain features into a killing field designed to blunt any armored assault. The first major clash came at 0830 hours, when elements of the 21st Panzer Division launched a counterattack against the advancing Americans. German Mark IV tanks emerged from concealed positions like steel predators, their long-barreled guns seeking targets among the American formations. The distinctive crack of high-velocity tank guns echoed across the battlefield as the two armored forces engaged at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Sergeant William Big Bill Murphy, commanding the 7-5mm anti-tank gun crew from the 1st Infantry Division, watched a German panzer advancing through his gun's sight with the deadly patience of a hunter. His crew had survived Kasserine Pass by learning to remain calm under fire, and that experience now paid dividends as they waited for the optimal shot. When Murphy finally gave the order to fire, the armor-piercing shell struck the German tank just below its turret ring, sending it up in a pillar of black smoke and orange flame. The air battle above El Guettar proved equally intense. German Messerschmitt 109 fighters engaged American P-40 Warhawks in swirling dogfights that painted contrails across the clear desert sky. Captain Charles Lucky Anderson of the 58th Fighter Squadron found himself locked in a deadly dance with a veteran Luftwaffe pilot, both aircraft twisting and turning in aerial combat. That would have been beautiful if not for its lethal intent. Anderson's training and his aircraft's rugged construction eventually proved superior, and the German fighter spiraled toward the desert floor trailing smoke and debris, as referenced in contemporary military dispatches preserved in the National Archives. The intensity of the fighting at El Guettar exceeded anything American forces had previously experienced in North Africa. German resistance was fierce and well-coordinated, with Colonel Lang demonstrating the tactical brilliance that had made the Afrika Korps legendary. Every hill, every wadi, every rocky outcrop became a miniature battlefield where individual acts of heroism determined the outcome of larger strategic objectives. By midday, the heat had become another enemy for both sides. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, turning tank interiors into steel ovens and making infantry operations a test of endurance. As much as courage, medics from both armies worked frantically to treat heat casualties, even as the battle raged around them, demonstrating that the desert itself remained a formidable opponent. Regardless of nationality or uniform color, the American advance had gained significant ground, but the cost was becoming apparent in the growing number of destroyed tanks and casualties scattered across the battlefield. Patton's gamble was paying off, but the final outcome remained far from certain as German reinforcements began arriving from other sectors of the Tunisian front. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the expanding battlefield as General Patton himself arrived at the forward command post, his jeep kicking up clouds of dust as it navigated between burning vehicles and shell craters. His famous ivory-handled revolvers caught the light as he dismounted, his steely gaze taking in the tactical situation with the practiced eye of a career soldier. The battle for El Guettar had reached its critical phase, and America's most aggressive general intended to personally oversee the decisive push. Major General Orlando Ward, commanding the 1st Armored Division, briefed Patton on the morning's developments while explosions continued to rumble across the desert landscape. The Americans had penetrated the outer German defensive lines, but faced increasingly stiff resistance as they approached the town itself. Colonel Lang's 21st Panzer Division was fighting with the desperate efficiency of cornered veterans, making every yard of ground cost precious American blood. Captain Samuel Harrison of the 6th Armored Infantry Regiment led his company through a maze of rocky terrain where German machine gun nests commanded every approach route. His men moved with the fluid precision of battle-tested soldiers, using covering fire and movement techniques perfected during weeks of desert training. When a hidden MG-42 opened fire from a concealed position, Harrison's response was immediate and decisive, directing his squad leaders to coordinate a flanking maneuver that silenced the weapon within minutes. The tank battle intensified as German reinforcements from the 10th Panzer Division arrived on the battlefield. Colonel Hans-Georg Hildebrandt brought with him a company of the feared Tiger tanks, their massive 88mm guns capable of destroying any Allied armor at extreme range. The psychological impact of these mechanical monsters was immediate, as American tank crews who had grown confident facing Mark IV suddenly found themselves outgunned and outarmored by an enemy that seemed invulnerable to their weapons. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien of the 7th 01st Tank Destroyer Battalion understood that his unit's 3-inch guns represented the best hope of stopping the German heavy tanks. His crew had trained extensively on the M10 Wolverine tank destroyer, learning to use its mobility and powerful gun to engage enemy armor from unexpected angles. When a Tiger tank appeared on their front, O'Brien's crew demonstrated the tactical flexibility that would become an American trademark, using speed and terrain to position themselves for a devastating flank shot that penetrated the German tank's side armor. The infantry fighting around El Guettar itself had devolved into brutal house-to-house combat, reminiscent of urban warfare. Lieutenant Thomas Jefferson Washington of the 39th Infantry Regiment led his platoon through streets lined with traditional North African buildings that provided perfect cover for German defenders. Every doorway potentially concealed an enemy soldier, every rooftop might hide a sniper, and every intersection became a killing ground where split-second decisions determined survival. German resistance centered around key buildings that had been converted into miniature fortresses, complete with interlocking fields of fire and carefully positioned anti-tank weapons. Sergeant Kurt Weber of the Afrika Korps had positioned his Panzerfaust teams to cover the main approaches to the town center, knowing that American armor would be forced to advance along predictable routes through the narrow streets. His men waited with the patience of experienced hunters, ready to strike at the vulnerable sides and rear of American tanks. As documented in official Army historical records, the fighting at El Guettar demonstrated significant evolution in American tactical doctrine and battlefield leadership. The costly lessons of Kasserine Pass had been absorbed and transformed into practical improvements in combined arms coordination, with infantry, armor, and artillery working together with unprecedented effectiveness. Radio communication between units had improved dramatically, allowing for rapid response to changing tactical situations and more effective concentration of firepower against German strong points. The day's casualties mounted on both sides as neither force was willing to yield ground easily. American field hospitals behind the lines worked around the clock to treat wounded soldiers, while German medical personnel performed similar duties under increasingly difficult circumstances. The desert sand around El Guettar was stained with the blood of soldiers from multiple nations, testament to the savage intensity of modern mechanized warfare. As evening approached, Patton's forces held most of the strategic objectives, but the German garrison in El Guettar continued to resist with typical Afrika Korps tenacity. Dawn on March 24th brought no respite from the punishing heat or the relentless combat that had transformed the approaches to El Guettar into a moonscape of craters and twisted metal. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself had arrived during the night. His presence immediately felt throughout the German defensive positions. As the legendary Desert Fox prepared to launch what could be his final major counteroffensive in North Africa, Rommel's tactical genius was evident in the pre-dawn repositioning of his forces. Under cover of darkness, elements of the 15th Panzer Division had moved into concealed positions along the flanks of the American advance, while the remnants of the 21st Panzer Division prepared to hold the center. The German commander understood that his only hope lay in a coordinated counterattack that would shatter American momentum and potentially drive Patton's forces back across the desert in confusion. Colonel Benjamin Dixon, Patton's intelligence officer, had anticipated German reinforcement but underestimated the scope of Rommel's response. American reconnaissance flights had detected increased vehicle movement during the night, but the full extent of German preparations remained hidden until the counterattack began at 0530, with a devastating artillery barrage that caught several American units in their defensive positions. Captain Robert Iron Bob Bradley of the 47th Infantry Regiment found himself in the eye of the storm as German shells rained down on his company's positions. His men, veterans of the previous day's fighting, responded with the disciplined reactions that separated experienced soldiers from green recruits. Bradley's radio crackled with reports from his platoon leaders as they coordinated defensive fires and prepared to meet the German assault that was certain to follow the preparatory bombardment. The main German attack came from an unexpected direction, with Rommel personally leading a combined arms thrust against what appeared to be a weakly held sector of the American line. Marked for tanks and panzer grenadiers advanced in the coordinated formations that had made the Afrika Korps famous across the continents. Their objective was ambitious: break through American defenses, capture the forward supply dumps, and potentially encircle significant portions of Patton's attacking force. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams of the 37th Tank Battalion met the German counterattack head-on with a textbook demonstration of American armored tactics. His Sherman tanks had been positioned in hull-down positions that maximized their defensive advantages while minimizing exposure to German guns. When Rommel's panzers appeared, Abrams coordinated a devastating crossfire that stopped the initial assault in its tracks, leaving burning German vehicles scattered across the desert floor. The fighting reached its peak intensity around Hill 509, a seemingly insignificant elevation that commanded views of the entire battlefield. Major Harold Hammer Hamilton of the 1st Ranger Battalion had occupied the hill with 2 companies of his elite troops. transforming it into a fortress that anchored the American defensive line. German attempts to capture the position met withering fire from expertly positioned machine guns and mortars, but Rommel's forces continued their attacks with characteristic determination. As recorded in official Wehrmacht battle reports captured after the war, the German counteroffensive at Guettar represented one of the most sophisticated combined arms operations attempted by Axis forces in North Africa. Rommel coordinated infantry, armor, artillery, and air support with the tactical brilliance that had earned him legendary status. But his forces lacked the numerical strength and logistical support necessary to sustain such an ambitious operation against a prepared enemy. American artillery played a crucial role in blunting the German assault. Colonel Charles Charlie Palmer's artillery regiment had registered their guns on potential German approach routes during the previous evening, allowing for immediate and accurate fire support when the counterattack began. Palmer's battery commanders coordinated their fires with surgical precision, dropping high explosive shells directly onto German formation headquarters and supply columns. The tide began to turn by mid-morning when American reserves, held back specifically for this contingency, entered the battle. The 3rd Armored Division's Combat Command had been positioned to respond to exactly this type of German counterattack, and their intervention came at the crucial moment when Rommel's forces had committed their reserves and could not respond to the new threat on their flank. By noon, the German counteroffensive had been decisively repulsed, with Rommel's forces retreating to their original positions, while leaving behind dozens of destroyed vehicles and hundreds of casualties. The Desert Fox had gambled everything on one final throw of the dice, and American tactical competence had proven equal to his legendary reputation. The 3rd day of battle dawned with a crystalline clarity that seemed to mock the devastation spread across the landscape around Guettar. General Patton stood in his forward command post, studying reconnaissance photographs that revealed the extent of German casualties. From the previous day's failed counteroffensive, Rommel's gambit had cost the Afrika Korps dearly, but the Desert Fox remained dangerous, like a wounded predator that becomes more unpredictable in its desperation. Colonel James Thunderbolt Thompson of the 47th Fighter Group had been planning this morning's air operation since before dawn, coordinating with ground controllers to identify high-value German targets that remained within range of his P-47 Thunderbolts. The heavily armed American fighters carried bombs as well as their standard machine gun armament, transforming them into flying artillery pieces capable of delivering devastating strikes against enemy positions. The air attack commenced at 0700 with a precision that demonstrated how far American close air support tactics had evolved since the dark days of Kasserine Pass. Wave after wave of thunderbolts stuffed toward German defensive positions, their bombs exploding with earth-shaking force among hastily constructed fortifications and camouflaged vehicle parks. German anti-aircraft guns responded with desperate fury, filling the sky with black puffs of flak, but the American pilots pressed their attacks with determination born of superior training and mechanical advantage. The resulting explosion sent a column of smoke and debris thousands of feet into the air, eliminating a crucial source of supply for Colonel Lang's increasingly hard-pressed defenders. Henderson's wingman, Lieutenant Robert Rabbit Johnson, followed up by strafing German infantry positions with his 850 caliber machine guns, the heavy bullets tearing through sandbag fortifications like tissue paper. On the ground, American artillery had achieved a level of coordination and accuracy that surpassed anything previously demonstrated in the North African theater. Colonel David Deadly Dave Martinez commanded a composite artillery group that included both divisional assets and corps-level heavy guns, creating a fire support system capable of delivering devastating barrages anywhere within a 20-mile radius. His forward observers, embedded with advancing infantry units, could call down precise artillery strikes within minutes of identifying worthy targets. The renewed American ground assault began at 0900 with a rolling barrage that moved ahead of advancing infantry like a steel curtain of death. Captain Ernest Easy Hemingway of the 18th Infantry Regiment led his company forward in the wake of the artillery, his men moving with the fluid confidence that comes from extensive combat experience and superior fire support. German resistance remained fierce, but the constant pressure was beginning to tell on defenders who had been fighting continuously for 3 days without relief. Sergeant Joseph Big Joe Martinez of the 2nd Armored Division found himself commanding a mixed task force of Sherman tanks and armored infantry as they pushed toward the final German defensive line protecting Guettar itself. His radio crackled with reports from scouts who had identified German anti-tank positions information that allowed Martinez to coordinate flanking maneuvers that avoided the most dangerous killing zones while maintaining pressure on the enemy, according to contemporary reports from war correspondents embedded with American forces. The battle's momentum had shifted decisively in favor of Patton's army by late morning. German defensive fires had diminished noticeably, suggesting that ammunition shortages were beginning to affect their ability to sustain resistance. More significantly, radio intercepts suggested that German commanders were discussing withdrawal options, indicating that Rommel had concluded that Guettar could not be held indefinitely. The breakthrough came at 1330 when elements of the 1st Ranger Battalion, supported by tanks from the 4th Armored Division, penetrated the German perimeter and established positions within the town itself. Major Sam the Man Roberts led his Rangers through streets littered with rubble and abandoned equipment, methodically clearing buildings that had been converted into miniature fortresses by desperate German defenders. German resistance began to crumble as word spread that American forces had entered Guettar. Individual units began withdrawing without orders, transforming what had been organized defense into increasingly chaotic retreat. Colonel Lang attempted to coordinate a fighting withdrawal that would preserve his remaining forces, but American pressure from multiple directions made organized movement increasingly difficult. By evening, American forces controlled most of Guettar, though isolated German units continued to resist from prepared positions on the outskirts of town. The strategic objective had been achieved, but Patton was already planning the exploitation phase that would prevent Rommel's forces from establishing new defensive lines further east. The morning of March 26th brought an eerie quiet to the battlefield, as the last German resistance around Guettar finally collapsed. Under relentless American pressure, Colonel Rudolph Lang, his uniform torn and dust-covered, led the remnants of his command in a skillfully executed withdrawal toward the northeast, abandoning the town that had cost so many lives on both sides. Behind him, American forces were already beginning the grim task of counting the cost of victory. General Patton toured the captured town in his command jeep, his practiced eye taking in the extent of destruction that modern warfare had inflicted on this ancient crossroads. Buildings that had stood for centuries lay in rubble, their walls shattered by artillery fire and tank guns. The streets were littered with the debris of battle, abandoned equipment, unexploded shells, and the tragic detritus that marked where brave men had fought and died for causes larger than themselves. Major Thomas Tank Thompson of the Corps of Engineers was already coordinating the massive cleanup operation required to make Guettar functional as a forward supply base. His men worked with mechanical efficiency to clear roadblocks, defuse unexploded ordnance, and restore basic infrastructure needed to support continued operations. Against Axis forces elsewhere in Tunisia, the speed of their work demonstrated the logistical sophistication that was becoming an American military trademark. Captain Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan, one of the few female officers serving in the forward areas, commanded a field hospital that had treated casualties from both sides throughout the battle. Her medical staff had worked around the clock under dangerous conditions, demonstrating the humanitarian principles that distinguished Allied forces from their Axis opponents. German wounded received the same expert care as American soldiers, reflecting military medical ethics that transcended national boundaries. The human cost of Guettar was sobering for both sides. American casualties totaled approximately 400 killed and wounded, while German losses exceeded 800, including many experienced Afrika Korps veterans whose expertise could not be easily replaced. Tank losses were similarly heavy, with the Americans losing 37 armored vehicles while the Germans lost over 50, including several of their precious Tiger tanks. Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Stewart of the Army Air Force's Intelligence Section was coordinating the analysis of captured German documents that revealed the strategic significance of the American victory. Among the papers found in abandoned German command posts were orders from Rommel himself indicating that the loss of Guettar would force a general Axis withdrawal from central Tunisia, potentially shortening the entire North African campaign by several months. The psychological impact of victory proved as important as the tactical results. American forces had decisively defeated crack German units in sustained combat, proving that the lessons learned at Kasserine Pass had transformed the United States Army into a formidable fighting force. Morale throughout Patton's command soared as news of the victory spread, while German confidence in their North African positions began to erode for the first time since Rommel's arrival in Libya 2 years earlier. As documented in official military histories preserved in the United States Army Center of Military History, The Battle of El Guettar marked a crucial turning point in American military development. During World War II, the tactical innovations developed during the fighting would be refined and employed throughout subsequent campaigns in Sicily, Italy, and northwestern Europe, establishing doctrinal foundations that would serve American forces for decades. Brigadier General Theodore Ted Roosevelt Jr., serving as Patton's deputy commander, addressed assembled troops in the ruins of El Guettar's Central Square. On the evening of March 26th, his words captured the significance of their achievement while honoring the sacrifice of those who had paid the ultimate price for victory. Roosevelt's speech, recorded by war correspondents, would be broadcast to American audiences hungry for good news from the North African front. German prisoners were processed through temporary facilities established in captured buildings, their treatment reflecting American adherence to Geneva Convention requirements. Despite the brutal nature of the recent fighting, many captured soldiers expressed surprise at the quality of American equipment and the professionalism displayed by their captors, contradicting Nazi propaganda that had portrayed Americans as militarily inferior. As night fell over the conquered town, Patton's forces were already preparing for the next phase of operations that would drive remaining Axis forces from Tunisia entirely. The victory at El Guettar had opened the door to complete Allied control of North Africa, setting the stage for the invasion of Sicily and the eventual liberation of Europe. 1 week after the guns fell silent at El Guettar, General Patton stood on the same hill where German observers had watched his initial assault, now surveying a landscape transformed by victory and the inexorable advance of American logistics. Supply convoys stretched to the horizon, their dust clouds marking the transformation of Tunisia from battleground to staging area for the next phase of Allied operations against Fortress Europe. The strategic ramifications of El Guettar extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Field Marshal Rommel, his North African empire crumbling under sustained Allied pressure, had been recalled to Germany by Hitler, effectively ending the legendary Desert Fox's involvement in the theater that had made him famous. German and Italian forces throughout Tunisia were now conducting a fighting withdrawal toward heavily fortified positions around Tunis and Bizerte, their final strongholds in Africa. Colonel Charles Chuck Davidson of the historical section was already interviewing participants and collecting documentation that would preserve the lessons learned during the battle for future military generations. His preliminary reports emphasized the crucial role of combined arms coordination, noting how American forces had successfully integrated infantry, armor, artillery, and air power in ways that had been impossible just months earlier at Kasserine Pass. Major General Omar Bradley, who would soon replace Patton as Second Corps commander, visited the battlefield to study the tactical innovations that had made victory possible. His observations would influence American military doctrine for the remainder of the war, particularly regarding the importance of thorough training, aggressive leadership, and maintaining initiative against experienced opponents. Bradley's methodical approach complemented Patton's aggressive instincts, creating a leadership combination that would prove devastating to Axis forces in subsequent campaigns. The technological lessons learned at El Guettar had immediate implications for American weapons development. After-action reports emphasized the need for improved anti-tank weapons, capable of defeating heavy German armor, leading to accelerated development of new gun systems and ammunition types. Similarly, observations about German defensive tactics influenced American training programs and tactical manuals used throughout the remainder of the war. Captain William Wild Bill Donovan of the Office of Strategic Services coordinated intelligence gathering operations among the Arab population around El Guettar, developing networks that would prove crucial during subsequent Allied operations in North Africa and the Mediterranean. The cooperation between American forces and local civilians demonstrated the importance of maintaining positive relationships with indigenous populations in occupied territories. Sergeant First Class Robert Rocky Marciano, serving as a physical training instructor for replacement troops arriving from the United States, used veterans of El Guettar as examples. During his training sessions, these battle-tested soldiers shared practical knowledge about desert warfare, equipment maintenance, and small unit tactics that could not be learned from training manuals or classroom instruction. According to the classified intelligence reports from the period, German high command recognized that the defeat at El Guettar represented more than a tactical setback. The systematic nature of the American victory, achieved through superior coordination rather than mere numerical advantage, indicated that United States forces had evolved into a genuinely dangerous Opponent capable of matching German military effectiveness on equal terms. The human stories emerging from El Guettar reflected the broader transformation of American society during World War II. Letters home from soldiers described not only the intensity of combat, but also their growing confidence in American military capability and their pride in serving alongside comrades who had proven themselves in battle against the German army's finest troops. 3 months after El Guettar, Allied forces launched Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, employing many of the tactical lessons and command relationships developed during the Tunisian campaign. Veterans of El Guettar formed the experienced corps around which new divisions were organized, their battlefield knowledge proving invaluable during subsequent amphibious and mountain warfare operations. The Battle of El Guettar thus stands as a crucial milestone in American military history, representing the moment when United States ground forces proved they could defeat German troops in sustained combat. From the ashes of Kasserine Pass had risen an army capable of fighting its way across Europe to final victory, with El Guettar serving as the crucible where American military competence was forged. Under fire, the desert crossroads that had witnessed such savage fighting in March 1943 became a symbol of American determination and tactical evolution, its legacy extending far beyond the sand dunes of Tunisia to influence military operations across multiple theaters of the Second World War.